Hey there, welcome back to another video. I am Ramona. This one is going to be a little different. Well, different, but talking about positive experiences with the paranormal. Sometimes we get a lot of negative stuff here, but we wanted to find something new and different. If you like this video, if you're enjoying any of my content, please like, maybe even subscribe, leave a comment. I would appreciate that. I'll try to respond. I sometimes forget to do that, but I would like to. So anyway, let's jump into the story, starting with, has anyone had positive paranormal encounters? I'm what they call a skeptic. I do believe in aliens, but I'm less convinced about spirits, ghosts, demons. This is odd though, because I have been reading through this sub and remembered that I had an occurring something come to me as a child. I had a rough childhood. My parents had split custody of me, and when I was with my mother, I slept in a laundry room. My mother was a drug addict and remarried an alcoholic, so I was very stressed when spending time over there. Anyway, every night I stayed in the house, a man would come and sit in my room at night. I remember him being sort of monochrome white and light blue. He had crazy white hair, think Einstein, and wore spiffy clothes, pinstripe pants, a white shirt, and suspenders. I don't remember him actually speaking, but I remember us having conversations. I know for sure in my heart that he was there to check on me during these rough times. You all mentioned feeling a presence in the room gets cold, but this man was pure warmth. I was never afraid of him. I remember him asking me how I was, and I would always sleep well after we talked. He also never left the doorway of my bedroom. He would pop in, so to speak. Unfortunately, my mother moved out of that house when I was 8, and so I never saw him again. I wish I could see him again. Has anyone ever had any experiences like this? As for the replies, religion and society has made us seem like God or Jesus no longer speaks to us, helps us, or even uses us in a way that is unusual but necessary. He especially loves the children, and I truly believe you because I truly believe that he will bend our normality to do what it takes for all children. In the Bible, Jesus tells his apostles that whoever were to do wrong to a child would tie a millstone around his neck. In other words, drown yourself, because God sees their angel faces. My grandmother has had her dad, who died in a freak plane crash in the military, visit her throughout her life. He's appeared in her bedroom, and she felt comfort and safety. I can't remember how many times he appeared, and during good or bad times. What I do remember, and it was quite a handful of times. Could this have been a dream or repressed trauma hallucination? Possibly. Or a half-awake dream state visually? Possibly. When my great-uncle passed away, odd things started happening at my grandmother's home. Doors would open and close by themselves. They'd lock and unlock themselves, as well as door knocks and doorbell rings, which were the knocks were loud. Many times we'd be in the room hearing them while looking at the window with nothing there, plus being able to see the locks move. Once we buried his ashes where he wanted us to, all of that went away. But it never frightened us. Initially we did it until, oh, maybe he's visiting because we haven't buried him yet. Now, could all of this have been caused by drafts, temperature fluctuations, electronic malfunctions? Possibly. However, it was strange indeed that the timing was when it all started and stopped. I used to be an atheist until I saw something I couldn't explain of a very spiritual nature, a so-called miracle. Long story short, I became fascinated by the occult. I can count on one hand the times I have ever been positive traditionally spirits operated in seen, I think it's supposed to be seen, in very positive patterns such as knocking, making sounds like voice-like sounds, peeking around corners, moving stuff around. Then there's the other types of miracles, such as hauntings, which are the repetitions of past events in the present space for which they happen, or manifestations of which some entity occur very strongly, frequently starting as soon as the sun starts to set and ending when the sun has risen. The only time I ever had a positive encounter, which didn't leave me mind creeped out, was when one day, early in the morning at 5:30, is that I had to return home from my travels toward my job, as it had started raining pretty heavily. When I got back home and entered, from around a corner, a girl with a white antique-looking gown and long black hair and pale skin and no face peeked out with half of her body, looked at me, and went back around the corner. I immediately ran for it and around the corner and found my all-cat looking at me with huge eyes as if saying, "Did you see that shit?" I can say everything else I've ever witnessed to involve the occult has been of very demonic nature, which we should actually take precautions against by way of a closer relationship to the one true God and Christ. It's true, man, I'm not trying to push religion on you. It's true that only God can help you live a spiritually fulfilled life. I was a Satanist for over a decade. Now I beg the Lord to forgive me. I was so stupid and naive, and my soul begs for forgiveness from God. I've seen some shit, my guy. For my own good, be closer to who I tell my son is the father of all ghosts. I definitely have had positive encounters. I went to college near my hometown and had to travel back roads to West Virginia to get to it. Along those back roads is a cemetery where my grandmother, grandfather, uncle, along with my grandmother's family, were buried. The only one I ever met was my grandmother, but every time I passed by I would say hello and goodbye to them all, but name Grandma, Grandpa, and Uncle Eric, or John Eric. My uncle died at 16 from leukemia, but he had a huge impact on my family and was very loved. I saw many photos of him growing up, and one of my brothers looked exactly like him. One day in the winter, I was driving to school in the dark, and he appeared in my passenger seat for just a split second. Right then, I hit a patch of black ice as I was going around a turn and nearly lost control of my car. It corrected itself very quickly, and I managed not to wreck into the ditches on either side of the road. One had a creek, and I would have gone into that one. I feel like he was there to keep me safe. I was about 5 minutes away from the cemetery where he was buried. I still say hello and goodbye to them when I'm back up there. My mother-in-law lives close to the cemetery, and when we visit, we stay with her. My son is named after that uncle. My bio mom passed away when I was 1 or 2. My dad has told me stories that when she passed, I started talking to the wall in my bedroom. And when he asked who I was talking to, he would say, "Mommy, don't you see her? She's right here." Freaked him out, but he told me that told her to never leave me. I am now 25, and I've seen her and felt her near my whole life. She's always with me. We never truly left. She never truly left. My dad has told me he sees her periodically as well, usually when I come over to visit and stay a few days. I truly hope she never leaves. I can't remember her very well, but it's comforting to know that she is there. Well, damn, last night I was sorting through my dad's library, who passed away 5 years ago, and picked a random book. It had markings of quotes he liked. When I saw them, I started to cry. With my eyes closed, I could picture him, but his mental picture started to zoom in on its own, and I couldn't control what I was picturing. I was sure if I opened my eyes, he'd be there, so I just asked him, "Please, Dad, don't scare me." As I opened my eyes, the room started to crack, like buildings usually do when the temperature changes. But this was way too synchronic. I don't know. It hadn't happened that night and didn't happen again. I cried some more and thought that was it. Then I looked for a paper to mark the pages I was reading and found a picture of him when he was like 24 or 25 years old between those pages. It was so weird, like a confirmation that he actually visited. It's too recent, so I get watery eyes just writing this. The story touched me for that reason. You're right. Our late loved ones never leave us. This may not be positive to some, but I looked at it to being like that. A little backstory for context. Whenever I get a forerunner, someone will always die within those 2 weeks. Not sure why, that's just the way it works out. Anyway, 2 weeks before his death, my daughter kept complaining that someone was knocking on her window. I assumed it was just some random kid, that being in the winter there was no footprints in the snow outside her window. This kept happening every other night, but I never heard because I was sleeping. The night before I died, my daughter comes to my room and tells me that she heard someone knocking on the front door. So I looked out, and I see no one there. It was 3 in the morning, by the way. This time I kept awake to see if I could hear it, but not. Even 20 minutes later, I heard these 3 small knocks on the window at my front door. My daughter was more relieved that she wasn't the only one hearing it now. But I was freaked out a little bit because I knew what it meant. I just told her that it was the house settling, and we went to bed. The next day, my youngest boy was sick, so I was watching TV with him in the living room when I heard the 3 knocks on the front door again. Again, no one was there. For context, I have an open concept living room and kitchen. I went and sat back down, and within 20 minutes there was knocking at my back door this time. And it wasn't 3 knocks this time. I could hear someone knocking on the window, but I had a full view of the back door and no one was there. Then the knocking started to go down the outside of the kitchen wall. My son was hearing it too, and to keep him from opening the door, I told him it was just the house settling. Later that night, we went to the gas bar. They had a lounge and restaurant there, and I ran into my friend's niece, who told me that she had to go to the hospital because her grandfather wasn't going to be alive much longer. And in my head, I was thinking that is why I was getting the warnings. It was just weird how prominent these ones were. Afterwards, I went into the lounge and saw my friend was still working her shift. I assumed that she was just working until someone could fill her shift. However, half an hour later, she was still working, and I was confused about how relaxed she was. Then it finally clued me in why the forerunner was so prominent. Her family hadn't bothered to tell her that her father was about to die. To confirm, I asked why she wasn't going to the hospital, and she replied, "Why would I?" I just sighed and told her that I informed by her niece the hospital called, and told them that he didn't have much time. Devastation was her complete expression, and she just sat there stunned. I asked if she needed a drive since she didn't have a car, and said that she could drive. Security was there when I told her, so that he would cover for her until they could find someone else. I took her and then picked up her daughter and grandson and got them to the hospital. He died half an hour later. So basically, I feel I didn't hear those warnings, that I would have waited longer to ask her if she was going, and then she might have missed her chance to see him alive once more. So although it freaked me out, a positive outcome did come from it. Whenever I was sick as a kid, like crazy fever sick, I would always be visited by an old woman that would sit on the edge foot of my bed. She'd just sit there like a quiet grandma and occasionally reach out like she was feeling my forehead. I never saw her anywhere else in the house, only my room, and only when I was sick. Not like that, but I saw a cat a week after he died. He jumped on my bed, stared at me until I realized he looked healthy again, and then he climbed over me and disappeared. I will grant that it was at night, and I guess it's possible that I was dreaming, but I don't feel like it was a dream at all. I certainly felt better after that. I have been completely heartbroken. I don't really know how or why he chose to come visit me, though. One night, one might say that I was not his favorite person, although he seems to have decided that I might be okay in his old age. I also heard my grandpa snoring when I was 16, 2 years after he died. It was the middle of the day, and my grandma heard it too. We were both wide awake. It wasn't necessarily positive, and it wasn't scary. It was just really weird. I remember as a teen, I was back home after visiting relatives in the state my grandpa had died in. I was woken up by a presence in my room. I felt warmth and smelled his cologne so strongly. I fell back asleep feeling safe and loved. I saw him at age 5, and I miss him so much. Yeah, when I was walking on a nature trail near my house one night after graduating high school, I had been drinking and was walking home with some neighborhood friends. We stopped off at some benches to sober up before we went to the house, just in case anyone's parents were still up. By the time we had decided to head to the rest of the way back home, it was about 2:45 a.m. We start moving towards the trail entrance, which was about 8-minute walk. So we get back to the main street at about 2:50ish, almost 3 a.m. We headed up the trail to where a side street is. That's a bit of a shortcut, but midway up the hill there was a lady, all in white robes or nightgown thing, sitting in the steps, on these steps, that led to a community center that overlooks the trail. My friends, being partially drunk, high school boys, say, should we mess with her? I say no, because she was like hunched over and appeared to be in some kind of pain or stress. And I could tell, and I told them to stay back, but be ready to run or fight just in case I was elected to approach her. So I crept over to her. I asked if she was all right and needed any help, to which she simply didn't respond. So I asked again and moved a little closer. When I was within what I guess was reaching distance, my friends were all like, "Yo, dude, chill, don't do it, let's just go." But I needed to hear her talk, because now I had goosebumps and felt an energy coming from her being so close. Well, I asked her again, "Ma'am, is everything okay? My friends and I were concerned. If there's anything that we can do, please let us know." Her leg kind of did this weird thing where it looked like she was twitching, but she had a wavy holographic look. Anyway, she shook her head slowly, no, and started muttering something. I asked one more time and said, "Last chance, if there's anything you need to go or somebody we need to talk to, let me know now, because we're about to head home." She laughed, kind of quietly, and then it started getting louder, and my boys were like, "Fuck, let's go, man." I agreed that there wasn't much we could do for someone that didn't express interest. So we started walking again, and just before we were out of earshot, she said something I'll never forget. She said, "What you see now is not what has been before, and when you aren't here, this place is something else." And she started laughing. I got crazy chills, and the guys started running. I turned a little ways up and looked where she sat, and she was gone. I researched what existed before the community center, and it turns out it was an asylum and some people who had died there over the years. So perhaps she was a spirit attached to the land, but every time I go back there, she is always in the back of my mind. Even on warm nights with the guys, I would still get a cool breeze. Me, I was visited as a child, by a man with curly hair, definitely an angel. I never knew who he was for sure until recently. I lost my firstborn son early this year, a few days after he was born, and I just knew it was him that had visited me. My husband and his family have very curly hair, and I realized this angel resembled my husband. Because of this, I was able to see my son all grown up, even though he had passed away as a baby. I was 16 when my dad died unexpectedly. He didn't live with us, so I didn't know he had passed. I was asleep, and suddenly I shot straight up and just knew he was in the room with me. I didn't see him because I was too afraid to look and confirm that it was him in the room with me now that something was very wrong, but I could feel him. Somehow, I knew the news before my mom even came in to tell me. It gives me peace knowing that he was able to visit me. There must have been something else after this life. I come from a family of sensitives and earth magic practitioners going back generations from Ireland, Spain, and Scandinavia, so I have had paranormal and supernatural experiences throughout my life, as have the rest of my family. Nearly all have been positive and casual, matter of fact. The most positive and lovely one was when my great-grandmother came to visit me when I was very small. When I was 5 or 6, my mamma and I lived in Grant's Castle house with extended family. My gran and granddad had lived there for years with 9 children, and at times a few grandchildren, and my great-grandmothers for decades before I was even born. My great-grandmother had passed more than 10 years before I was born when my mamma was quite young. My mamma and I shared a large back room which doubled as a sitting play room. One night I was sleeping in my bed facing my toy cupboard, which had no door. But there was a pretty sheet which mamma had painted nailed to the frame of the cupboard, keeping my toys tidy. I remember suddenly opening my eyes to see a little old lady in the doorway of my toy cupboard. I wasn't scared, which in itself was slightly strange, as I felt the old lady was familiar and safe. She just appeared to be a regular little old lady with slightly strange-looking clothes. Without moving her mouth, she said, "It's okay, pet. I've just come to see how you are. Go back to sleep." The words sounded clear in my head. Being 5 or 6, I said okay and went back to sleep. The next day, I was playing in the garden with Mom, and I told her about what I said. And when I told her about it, she said it was a dream. Mamma, who was very close to her grandmother, looked at me, then asked me to describe the old lady, so I did. Mamma looked a little strange, and then changed the subject. Years later, we were talking about family with my big cousin Jimmy, who was living with Mamma and I at the time. I was about 8, and Jimmy was about 15 or 16. Mamma told me that when I described that little old lady, I actually described our great grandmother. Jimmy laughed and said that he had the same bedroom. In the same bedroom, he had seen our great grandmother also, in the same place I saw her. There were only 3 differences. Jimmy knew our great grandmother before she passed, although he'd been very young, but he remembered her pretty well. It was in the middle of the day when Jimmy saw her, and she just smiled at him without speaking. My mamma got out a really old-looking family photo, and in the middle of the family members, I knew, looking younger, as the very same kindly-looking old lady. Additional note, Pet is used as a pet name for many people from Newcastle, and I think Sunderland, also where my great-grandmother's family originated from. When my grandfather had a brain tumor, something spoke to me the week prior to his death. On the Thursday before he died, I had this voice in my head that told me I needed to gather the family in his house on the following Tuesday. He was in hospice, so we all knew it was coming. On Tuesday, the whole family came over, and my great-grandfather passed away the second that my dad and uncle walked through the door on their way home from work. It was as if my grandpa held on to his last breath until they were all there. I held my Nana as she cried for the next hour or so. The mortuary transporters walked through the door after the paramedics were done, and they took away my grandfather's body. Fast forward to the following morning. My father was always the first one to wake up and head downstairs. On that morning, he walked downstairs and called for us all to come see. The 4 chairs around our dining table were stacked on top of the table in sets of 2s. One chair was standing straight up. The other chair was flipped upside down on the top so that the seats were touching. Nobody in my house had ever put the chairs on the table, and certainly didn't that night. To this day, we believe that Grandpa was just trying to say goodbye. He was unable to speak through the last month of his life. I still get chills every time I think about this. I was a heroin addict for 15 years until my fiance died of an overdose. Well, it had been a few months since his passing. I was sitting in rehab in front of a huge bay window. I was feeling kind of defeated, and all of a sudden I felt a large rush come over me, and I could feel it was coming from the top of the closed window. A feeling of calm and peace and acceptance rushed over me, and I just knew without a doubt that it was him. I had just been clean for over 6 years now, and I truly believe that he died so I could finally live. I was a volunteer firefighter in college. One day we were working a good-sized fire, the large storage unit complex. At some point, I was asked to go to a vacant storage unit adjacent to the row of units on the fire with an XL98 saw and a large gun cut a large inverted V through the sheet metal back wall to ventilate the fire on the other side. Unbeknownst to me, the gases from that side of the fire were already pouring through and massing above me at ceiling level and settling down on me as I was cutting. The unit was getting super hot, and the smoke was increasingly becoming yellowish brown and wavy, but I kept cutting. Suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder, and a voice behind me say, "You've got to get out now. You're on fire." The voice was clear and not muted by a breathing apparatus. I was startled, but pulled the saw out of the sheet metal and turned and started walking towards the opening. I was almost out before the gases in the upper half of the room ignited. Heavy flames were now pouring out of the entrance as I was coming out. As I emerged, I remember several guys screaming and waving me towards them. I made my way over to them, oblivious of what had or was happening. I did not turn around to look on my way out. The department operations chief came up and asked if I was okay. I said yeah, but did end up with a few minor burns. He and a few others started telling me about what had happened and how lucky I was to get out when I did. I asked the chief who walked in and told me to get out. He looked at me in disbelief and said, "No one." He said he had been observing that entire side of the building and saw no one go in to warn me, or anyone come out while doing so. I asked around and got the same answers. No one. I can only assume that was my guardian angel that day. Yes, I have had two. One is more mythical than paranormal. My mom's long deceased cat ran across my feet. I had never met this cat. I knew nothing about him. But I described him to my mom, and the name was randomly popped into my head, and she freaked out. It was such a happy experience. I think I was around 10 years old. His name was Putty, and was mostly white. He died because he drank antifreeze in the 80s from the same and ran from behind one couch to another right over my feet. The other thing happened when I was like 6. I was playing in the backyard to our old house. I looked at my right, and it was like time stopped. There was a frickin' fairy. I was in shock. She moved in slow, and when I snapped out of it and yelled to my aunt, who was on the porch, that there was a fairy, she disappeared. It was like a second, the whole thing, but it felt like forever when I was looking at her. It felt so calm and peaceful. What's funny is I still don't believe in fairies. And also, how could I not? Well, there you go. I hope you enjoyed that video. And if you did, like I said, please like, share, subscribe, leave a comment. I'd love to hear something from any of you. And please go watch another video. And until next time, we'll talk to you later on. Bye-bye.